everyone. My name is Perez-Carreno, and welcome to the Web Talk Show. Our guest today is Leandro Dsylva, Harvard educated with a fellowship from Oxford University. He is the founder and the global training director of Miller Weinman Training, Inc., and they are the world leader in executive leadership communication. If you weren't aware, he's trained, coached, and mentored presidents, vice presidents, prime ministers, senators, and global CEOs and entrepreneurs in their executive presence and public speaking. Some clients like Berkshire Hathaway, JP Morgan Chase, PepsiCo, Meta, Walmart, Bank of America, to name a few. We are joined by a master in his craft. Welcome, Leandro.
Thank you, Armando. I hope I can become half the man you described me to be.
I'm sure you are. Your trajectory has been truly impressive. I'll be honest, when I reached out originally, I had seen some of your stuff, but then as I did more research, I just found a breadth of, we'll get into what you actually do, but there's so much things that you've done for people to help them grow that affect all of us without us knowing, because of the people that you've helped. And so it's truly an honor to have you here. And I'll get right to it. I do really, really want to know, how did you get to personal transformation training? How did you stumble upon this?
Well, let me take you way back, and you're never going to believe this, but I was a very shy and reticent child, and my mom realized that very early on. And of course, she threw me at the deep end, and I had to swim. She put me into some very good theatre and drama schools back home in Bombay initially. And I realized I started to get a newfound confidence, which was able to articulate my point of view in a more succinct manner. And today, I go around the world giving people that confidence that I didn't have as a child growing up.
Wow. So theater. Now, was this musical theater? Was it regular theater, classical theater?
It was regular theater. It was a lot of the classics as well as very non-conventional stuff. Things like, playwrights like R.D. Laing, and of course, a bit of Shakespeare as well.
Do you think people can get out? Well, you know, because it's your your path, but people sometimes think they might be shy, and that's them. That's how they're going to be for the rest of their lives, and they're not outgoing, and they think maybe because of how I am, and talking maybe a young person, maybe they don't see themselves in a leadership position, for example, because they're shy. So do you think that's something that stays with people, or can it be overcome?
Oh, it definitely can be overcome. One is being true to yourself, and today we talk about being authentic or authentic leadership. But that's one part of the ball game. The second and more, I think, pertinent part is the part where we talk about pushing people out of their comfort zone. Specifically, if someone has something interesting to share to a larger audience, but they're holding back just because of nerves. That's where we come in. We give them a platform to perform, train them, coach them, mentor them, and then the world becomes their oyster.
Wow, this this whole concept of learning via other methods, in this case, entertainment, is very interesting to me. We've had a few guests, specifically last week, on the training space. And one of the things that was said was that a lot of training programs or workshops don't work at the end of the day. Some companies come in, they do the training, they get people in their workshops, they didn't really find the root cause, they put everyone in, and then, yeah, they do the training, but then it doesn't really help any results. And so when I was looking at what your company does, I found the edutainment part of it, and just the word alone is great. How does making something more fun affect its output?
Very interesting question. Thanks, Armando, for that. I'll break that question up into two parts. The first is going back to the adult learning principles. The moment the fun stops, the learning stops. So if you take fun out of the equation, you're just going to have learning. And then sometimes, now the second part to your question is everyone could provide a platform to learn. And that's not taking away from anyone, but specifically from this perspective, Is that learning pragmatic? Can it be practically applied in a real world situation, in the real operating shop floor? Because if that learning can't, then it just stays by the textbook, it stays in the learning room. And like you rightly said, a good 90% of learning stays just right there. And 10% is where learning is applicable, it can be applied, adapted, adopted, and lived through the learner.
Interesting. So we take the fun part out, the learning stops. I love that. Why then do schools have it totally backwards?
Well, Armando, I wish I could go to every school in town and beyond because I was a product of some very boring teachers. And I realized sometimes that, if I had to start my own learning venture, which eventually I did, I would make learning fun. I would make, and that's exactly the phrase where you took education and you put entertainment, and together you had edutainment. And I wish a lot of high school teachers, a lot of university teachers applied, understood adult learning principles, specifically from a learning with fun perspective, learning being pragmatic. Learning doesn't take place unless behavior changes.
Hmm.
And you can't change anyone's behavior unless you change the way he or she thinks. So it goes back to mindset shifts.
That makes a lot of sense. I was talking with my wife this morning specifically about music class. So our daughter's in music class and she really enjoys it. And there's this other girl in her class who is constantly distracted. And in this case, it's not that the class isn't fun, but that that girl might not tremendously enjoy music class or that type of music class. And therefore, she gets distracted. So, do you think there is something to be said about in schools or education in general that we need to make sure we listen to what the children or how the children are acting and maybe change up the structure to make sure that everyone is actually taking it in?
Armando, again, a fantastic question, and thank you for the question. I'm going to answer this in two parts. The first part being getting your learners engaged, involving them, and audience engagement is critical because the moment you have an isolation principle at play where you, as the facilitator, trainer, teacher, mentor, coach, guide, whatever name you want to call it, is at one end of the spectrum and the learners are on the other end of the spectrum, and somewhere you don't come midway or you don't go and pull them, to the learning curve or platform, you're going to have a lost audience. That's the first part. So engagement is key and critical in the learning curve. The second part is when you talk about your daughter, today we live in an attention deficit society. Social media has made a lot of us socially inept.
Mhm.
And you'll find people just going from reel to reel to reel. And it's been proven by neuroscience as well that an attention span, the prefrontal cortex takes roughly around, I would say, about 11 to 18 minutes. And that's exactly why TED Talks, even on that platform and at that level, are roughly around 18 minutes because however good the facilitator or speaker is, people tune out, people zone out. Now, it's a great facilitator who will bring back,
Mhm.
involve, engage, and can see that. Now, this is where theater came and helped me. I could see a disinterested audience. I could feel their pulse, and I would bring them back to their fold with simple energizers, activity-based learning, things that they would love to do.
That's that's a great example. The theater part of it, I think, compared to cinema, is a whole other art. A lot of people don't see this because you are on stage and the audience is right there with you. Sometimes we forget, but they are
Absolutely.
there with you. And if you pay attention, you can change what you were about to do based on them not actually paying attention, or you want to get a different response from them. And you're the expert in this part. But I think theater is so important in this sense because, well, I'll give you an example. When maybe, I don't know what, 10 years ago, they asked me to go there was this program they were going to do in my old high school, bringing in entrepreneurs and giving some small talks to some of the students. And I was like, oh yeah, sure, of course, that would be interesting. Getting on the other side, right? Because these are high school students, and so I remember very clearly because it wasn't like a big talk or anything. It was just I was just telling them about some things, but I noticed that some of the you could tell who is who in the classroom very
Right.
fast, and so there were these kids that I knew were probably going to be the troublemakers, and the they start chatting amongst themselves, and so I included them in the conversation immediately and brought
Right.
them back. And I stopped to I just thought to myself later, what if teachers would do that more often, you wouldn't get so many distractions, because the kids, if they are edging away, it's just because they didn't feel like you were just saying that connection with the teacher and the subject, and so they just nod off or try to do their own thing. But if we bring them back, right? How important is it when you have someone you are training to build a connection? So, how important is building a connection with them for the communication to occur?
Armando, once again, a fantastic question. And again, there are two parts. I'm going to level up. The first part, which you talked about, is KYA. You got to know your audience, and specifically that there are different types of learners. You're going to have visual learners, auditory learners, kinesthetic learners, ones who love to learn by seeing, love to learn by listening in the auditory, and kinesthetic are people who love to learn by doing and experiencing the learning curve. The second part to your question is how do you connect? I think you can connect on two major fronts. Like we have the left brainer and the right brainer. People have a logical connect as well as an emotional connect. So when you talk about a logical connect, could it be talking about, like we learned at Harvard Business School, demonstrations, examples, facts, figures, statistics, numbers, data, as they don't lie. I remember working with a very big Indian industrialist a couple of years ago, and he says, Leandro, in God we all trust, but everyone else needs to bring data to the table.
That's a good one.
Yeah. When you talk about an emotional connect, you talk about having the power of stories. And today's storytelling has become an art and a skill as well, a learned skill as well as a science. Humor, analogies, references, quotes, or even a picture speaks a thousand words. I could talk about Mother Teresa forever, talk about world peace forever, but if I show you a picture of Mother Teresa, you get the message immediately. That's world peace.
That is powerful. And having a picture or a video in the context of today is such a powerful tool as well. Because going back to training, there's still many, and you might have some numbers on this, but there's so many training programs and workshops that are still based on slides, PowerPoint presentations, keynotes that just have text on them. And you wonder why people are dozing off. You
Correct.
could use pictures, one picture, one striking image like Mother Teresa, or a video, or a graphical representation of something, or even music. But why do you think people still use slides, knowing that if they were asked to go to that presentation, they probably wouldn't enjoy it either?
Absolutely. We call that death by PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm.
Now, specifically, if I've seen a lot of slides and I see a business presentation, in fact, a couple of business presentations every day around the globe, and I see such text-heavy slides. Now, I remember when I was doing my thesis in leadership communication, we were specifically told, and we researched as well, that there's the 6 by 6 rule. Now, in a 6 by 6 rule, they specifically mention that you should not have more than 6 bullet points per slide and not more than 6 words per bullet point. That means that's roughly around 36 words per slide. Now, if you just go back, rewind, and if you look at some of the slides we see, even as of today, you'd find, geez, they are heavily loaded. They're text heavy. There's an information overload. People should be able to read and understand your slide in the first 10 seconds. And if they can't within 10 seconds, you'd know you haven't done a great job.
That makes a lot of sense. I remember looking at some presentations where even if you're trying to pay attention to the speaker, if it's so noisy, you're trying to figure out on your own and you stop paying attention to the speaker. So that makes a lot of sense. 6 by 6, I hadn't heard about that model. That's makes a lot of sense. It just keeps it simple. You can just go back,
Right.
revise, make sure you get rid of all the. And now with these, all the LLMs and everything, people, you might love them or hate them. They are tools at the end of the day. So if you have something that's
Absolutely.
heavily packed in content, well, try to pass it through it. If you're not good at summarizing, pass it through one of these LLMs, explain, tell it the 6 by 6 principle. It might get you closer. Now, you still have to revise it to keep it human, right? But at the end of the day, it will help you get closer.
I'll give you a simple example. For example, when people kind of have text-heavy slides or there's an information overload, I say just mail it to me. I'll read it when I have the time. But if you're presenting, keep in mind that you are the message as a presenter. That slide is just a medium.
Mm,
People spend so much of time on the medium and spend very little time on the person who's actually the message, which is the presenter.
that makes a lot of sense. And I've seen these powerful presentations where this person goes up and they have a blank slide or a black slide. And it's just, and it's a shock. But at the end of the day, there's such a great presenter that captures you and the theater comes back into it. At the end of
Right.
the day, a presenter is doing a performance, right?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
I really like your KYA, know your audience bit, because I'm wondering, do you think, even if it's something that you're doing, let's say I'm doing a training every week, and this is for all of you who are doing training, if our listeners do training programs and they're doing the same program every week, do you think it is worth it to dig into who the audience will be for each of those sessions and adjust the content ever so slightly such that it will match, even if it's the same basic structure, who is actually listening?
Absolutely. And that's what we call the power of reinventing yourself as a facilitator, as well as the content. Like you said correctly, the content, the base content could be the same, but the way you connect, the way you roll it out, the way you run an activity differently with the set of audience, knowing that they are at a certain level. For example, we run a program called the Management U, and that can be run right from the CX level to the junior most individual contributor at an organization. Now, the base content stays the same, but the messaging changes along the way depending on who's in front of you. And if you don't KYA, know your audience, you're in for trouble.
Interesting. So I was looking at some of your programs and solutions, and Management U, I wasn't really sure where in the structure it fits. So as you're explaining now, it makes a lot of sense. So the program really does apply across the board.
Right, absolutely. In fact, the
Mm.
Management You program is a personal transformation program. It's run for the CX level across the globe, as well as, like I said, an individual contributor. What's interesting is there is a 3 point objective. It makes you more confident, more uninhibited, and more expressive as a communicated presenter. In fact, it's a master storyboard in how to tell a great story to the audience, how to connect with them, and it takes a deep dive into the three big V's of communication. It helps you with your visual, your vocal, and your verbal, how to interact with audiences across the globe, and how to answer those pray don't ask questions.
Let's unpack that. So there's visual, there's verbal, right? What is this is well, we could go down a rabbit hole, but visual. Let's start with visual. So how does that affect someone's communication?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, when Dr. Albert Merabin, who's the father of body language. In fact, I had the distinct honor of being trained by him. He's a former UCLA professor, and he came over to Harvard to lecture us on the power of nonverbal. And when I was attending Dr. Merabin's sessions, he talked about the three V's, and he says visual is everything that people see. For example, even your dress sense. They look at your eye contact, your facial expressions. It takes more muscles to frown and less to smile. So go ahead and smile. You automatically open the audience to your point of view. Uh, Look at your gestures, all of that, right? Now, vocal is your voice modulation. It's your energy, your enthusiasm, your pitch, your pace, your pause, your power. And finally, verbal is, he says, talk is cheap, but the rubbers really hit the road. And so he said about 7% is verbal, 55% is visual, and vocal is 38%. But very interestingly, he went back to studying the three V's concept, and he came up, roughly around a decade later, he came up with visual, vocal, and verbal have to be 33.3% each. The reason being is because that's when you're really in business. That's when your communication is congruent. Otherwise, you're non-congruent. Because what people see is what they don't hear, and how they perceive or receive it is a totally different ball game. So your three V's have to be in congruence for you to be in business.
Wow. Verbal, I think some people understand, even though they don't apply it or try to get better, but it's a very important one. Visual, I think some might relate as well, though most don't apply it. But then vocal is one that I found so much power in, and throughout history, everyone can see that's when you see a great speaker, a great president, and how they express themselves. They have definitely used both of the other aspects, but the vocal, the lowering and raising of the voice, and the speed
Right.
and the pace and the changing of the tuning, right, of the melody of the voice is so important to learn that I don't know why we're not learning it. Aside from being in theater, musical theater, or other type of performance-based activities, where do people are, or where are supposed people are supposed to be getting this training before going into the real world?
Armando, there's a company called Miller Wyman. Might I remind you? Well, jokes aside, that was in lighter vein. I believe if one ain't working on their visual, vocal, and verbal, they're definitely not in the business of communication. And everyone communicates. I keep telling this to my students across the globe, Armando, that the moment you open your mouth to speak, you are performing. The moment you open your mouth, you are selling yourself. You may say, well, I don't like selling. I detest selling. I'm not in sales, but everyone is selling. And it's not what you're saying, but how you're saying it that makes all the difference. It's not what you know, it's how you tell the world what you know.
Yes, I agree. The We mentioned this last week in some of the other shows as well. The part where you're talking about you're always selling. At the end of the day, you're trying to get someone to either move in a certain direction or take an action, whether it's your kids or a client or a colleague or someone in your business hierarchy. And you have to make that connection first, but you have to also use all these visual, verbal, vocal aspects to be able to engage with them. Otherwise, they'll nod off. But you mentioned something very important at the beginning, which is being authentic. Because even if you cover everything, that's where the sales bit comes in. Many people sort of shy away from the sales aspect because they get that, they remember seeing or feeling uncomfortable with someone being pushy in a sales conversation. And that is, I mean, that is not the proper way to do it, but we all have felt it. And so we attribute sales to that. And it's not
Right.
right at the end of the day. So, what advice could you give to someone who has that fear of feeling pushy or salesy, what can they do to overcome it? Like someone that is shy, in this case, how does someone who shies away from a sales conversation overcome that shyness or that fear with some of these tools?
Uh, well, again, thanks, Romano, but there are two parts to your question. The first is, what does one do? One has to realize there has to be some amount of self-awareness. And the
Mm-hmm.
moment self-awareness sets in, it also sets the ball of being a little more emotionally intelligent and saying, hey, yes, I realize I'm shying away from the selling bit. At the same time, I know it's critically important for me to put my best foot forward. Now, the person who's shying away has to be told right at the very start that if you don't sell yourself and you don't sell yourself well enough to the larger world, or you don't share what skill sets you bring to the table, the spoils go to someone else. So if you're happy to be relegated to second place or back of the pecking order, so be it, right? You've got to respect where if the person doesn't want to move forward, you can't move anyone forward who doesn't want to move forward. So self-awareness is critical. The second part is I remember very early on my parents. I mean, they threw me at the deep end. Being a very shy and reticent child, I mean, I I I would just not want to go to that drama class or school. And I went to some of the best speech therapists in the country growing up in Bombay. I remember that whether I liked it or I had to lump it, I had to show up, dress up, and show up to class. And I did just that. Today, because I did that about 20, 25 years ago, it has given me that confidence to go around the globe, start a trading company that builds people's executive presence, something that I was shying away from. And today, we've become the world's leading executive presence company. A boy started off in a small little town in Bombay called Bandra, and now based out of Boston, but I travel extensively around the globe.
I
So
think that is
if I
something,
hadn't pushed
yeah.
if I hadn't pushed myself,
Mm-hmm.
Armando,
Mm-hmm.
I would be still back home in Bombay.
That is exactly what I was gonna say. The people who are might be in this position. So if you're listening to this and you feel you can't go anywhere because you're shy, or if your parents are trying to guide you towards doing something where you can expand your sense of self worth and also perhaps improve your speech patterns. Some people are they hear speech therapy and they say no, I don't want that, or even the parents, they know their child will be better off if they do that because it'll change something for the better. So hearing it from someone as successful as yourself should be, at least for someone out there, very powerful because that might change the little trigger in their mind and say, okay, yeah, maybe should continue with this. Maybe I should put my first foot forward because if you can do it, they can too.
Absolutely. And might I add one point here, Armando, is I would like to share with the audience, whoever's listening, who would listen in. If you don't believe in yourself, don't expect anyone to believe in you. But also, might I add here, sometimes when you start to believe in yourself, you're going to find a lot of good well wishers along the way who slowly start to believe in you. Like because I kept pushing myself to the deep end and out of the comfort zone, I realized I had a few very good professor friends. I had some well wishers. I had some professional directors growing up who helped me come out of my comfort zone. And so a lot of kudos to a lot of mentors along the way who helped to build me up to becoming a better person.
That's great advice. I We in this world of social media, which is a great thing. Social media, if used properly, is, think about it. We can reach a global audience in seconds just by grabbing the phone, posting something. I can post a video. It could be watched by someone in Mumbai. It could be
Correct.
watched by someone in Australia. It could be watched by someone anywhere in the world. And that's amazing, especially if you're sharing good content. I think in this world, that we live in now, many people that become successful are then sharing only the successful part of it and how they made it, and now they're like, yes, I did this and this and this and this, but they don't necessarily mention what you just said, which is the mentors along the way, the well-wishers along the way, those that actually helped you get further.
Absolutely, absolutely. Uh, uh, you know, not only the mentors, and I realized teachers, principals, certain priests, certain nuns, certain friends of the family, certain, well-wishers, they all were instrumental in my becoming a better person and professional in the last 23 years. And so credit goes to all of them. And I start off with my immediate family, my parents, who of course both passed and no more, my sisters, their families, relatives, neighbors, friends, everybody who just believed. And because I believed in myself along the way, and with a lot of hard work, effort, and education, it can take you from place A to B. But one thing I'd like to say is invest in yourself. And I'm not saying this because we run a personal investment company in terms of the management, you and Miller Wyman. But if you don't invest in yourself, growth becomes a challenge. Whether you want to move from Mumbai to Munich to Manchester to Madrid, you need to invest in yourself.
That is so true. And by the way, Miller Wyman does have some really amazing programs, and that was really one of the reasons I reached out originally. When I saw that you used guided discovery and role playing and learning with fun, that immediately caught my attention. And if we can dive a little bit into that, what is guided discovery?
Oh, Armando, guided discovery, there are various pedagogical tools that one could use in the facilitation cycle. Guided discovery is a tool that helps you as the facilitator to become a guide on the side. So you kind of give a little download and then you step aside and you watch them perform. You watch your learners in the room do, practice, and as a guide on the side, you first leverage peer feedback and then you can share your feedback. Now, let me share something about feedback. A lot of people think feedback is only what A, B, or C ain't doing right, but that in fact is wrong because good feedback is what the person is doing right so they can repeat that behavior. As a result, they can hardwire it, it becomes automatic, and it becomes second nature. But there's no harm in constructive criticism along the way. If you would like to sandwich that between the good, the bad, and what can be done better, the start, continue, stop method of feedback, you're in business of sharing. But more importantly, it's the tonal quality and how you share that feedback rather than using it as a punitive measure to punish people. You use it as a redemptive measure. You use it as a measure to uplift them and upskill them along the way and cross-skill them and give them a platform to perform.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's no longer just a lecture where
Huh?
you're just giving them something. You're actually involved in the whole process.
Yes.
Wow. How does role playing come into play?
Absolutely. In fact, we've talked a great deal about me having a theater background growing up in Bombay and beyond. I've been able to leverage a lot of those skill sets in the training room. If you ask over the 10 lakh students I've trained or professionals or executives I've trained globally, right from the CX level to the junior most employee, they'll tell you, oh, it's always fun to be in Leo's session. And the reason being is because I've done a lot of role plays. Now, you got to understand that role play, if it's just a role play, is dangerous. But a role play which leads to real play, that is where the rubber really hits the road. So you start off with asking them to come out of their comfort zone, to play a character they can't really play. Can't they? Sometimes it's difficult being themselves. Can you imagine asking them to be someone else that they're not? And then through that process, you extract. So I use a lot of recording tools as well. And I let them watch how they've performed. And I say, hey, look, this is what you've done well. This is what you can continue to do and repeat. But this is something you can start doing possibly. This is something perhaps you may want to stop doing. As a result of which, they slowly pick up the right pieces, they put it together, and they get more holistic in the learning curve. But keep in mind, role play only for the heck of role playing ain't a great learning tool, but role play which leads to real play where they can apply what they've learned in that role play, that is when you're in business.
Wow, this is bringing it back to the source, original basis of the word team. We talk about teams in corporate, but we don't really think of them as teams, like a sport team. But if you go to a sport team and you see the American football or any other type of, you see they have this whole process where they're constantly training, putting in the work, but then they go in and they do the diagrams and they show them and they look at the recordings and they see what they did wrong, what they did right. Now we can do this thing right again, like you were just saying. So some of that
Right.
mentality should spill over more to this side, right?
Absolutely. Where you do a post-mortem post every match.
Mm-hmm.
So
Which
we
we
have
don't do in.
something,
Mm-hmm.
like which we don't do exactly, which we should be doing. And that's why with every session, specifically in the management, Armando, we do a pre-assessment. We record them. We show the student community where they are currently, and we also show them their potential map of where they could possibly grow or go on to become. Yeah. Then we do a mid-assessment in between the program to tell them, okay, now you're here, but you still have potential to reach here, and we kind of push them, sometimes push their limits a bit as well, and ask them to push themselves in that learning curve. And we do a post assessment. And so they have a pre, a mid, and a post assessment. And there's no rocket science. And you'll always find that the post assessment is far better than the pre assessment because of the students' community, their effort, and their inclination, and their dedication and commitment to the learning curve. Nothing to do with us. We just guides on the side.
Wow. Now I'll pause here just because I think the audience should hear this. Leandro here is being a little humble when he says he's gotten good feedback from some CEOs and executives. There's a quote from Warren Buffett saying Leandro's an absolute genius in bringing out the best in people. So this we are in another league here with Leandro, and just so you take his advice as it is, I mean, you take it with a grain of salt, of course, but you're listening to someone who's doing this at a very high level, helping people become better persons, better humans. But these are people that affect our everyday lives with their businesses, with their running of their countries. And so it is, again, take it with a grain of salt, but at the end of the day, he knows his stuff. So going back to Leandro, what you're saying about management I read about it and I say, wow, this is wonderful. I think I, as a regular entrepreneur, would love to have something like this. But then I think, well, I mean, I see their client list. This must be a tremendously expensive thing. This must be completely out of my reach, etc. So we don't have to talk about pricing or anything, but just in general, what should someone who actually hears us and says, wow, this is definitely something I need in my company or for myself as an entrepreneur, how do I get the benefits of this? Is this something achievable, or should I see this as something that I should plan for the future in maybe the next 5 years when I'm ready or at the right level?
Interesting question, Armando. Thank you. So this is a course that's easily affordable by anyone, anywhere in the world. Of course, there are levels to the course, there are levels to the certification, which we'll talk about later. But this is a course that can be achieved by anyone who's willing to learn. If they have the will, we will give them that skill. And I don't mean to sound like a frustrated copywriter or kind of use rhetoric here, but it's a fact. If they have the will, we can really create magic together as a team. It's easily affordable. In fact, being born and raised in Bombay myself, um, I keep coming back to India very often. When I come back to India, we've been running a lot of programs across various universities in the country and beyond, just to give back to the Indian population, to the Asian population, because I see a big difference. With the Indians and the Asians, there's no doubt about it. They're a bright lot. They got their gray cells way up there. But there's a big difference between the Americans and there's a big difference between the Americans and the Europeans, and that's the difference is communication and presentation. The Americans and the Europeans can sell ice to an Eskimo. He doesn't need the damn ice. He lives in the tundra region, but the way they put their point of view across, this is where our Indian community and our Asian community need to really step up. This is why I keep coming back to India. In fact, one of the important work that we do is with the Ministry of External Affairs in the country as well. And so I'm back a week every month to spend some time, not just with the global CXO community of the various companies that consult within the region, but also with the government to help their people, the Indian Foreign Service, various, I would say, ambassadors of India to various countries, helping them to come up the curve as well.
And that makes perfect sense. Because of your background, I imagine you also made it such that even though it's such a powerful tool, it's still affordable to
It's
different.
affordable, absolutely, Armando, affordable and should be accessible to everyone.
That is fantastic. I didn't expect that, to be honest. I because of how it's just I just mentioned it already, because of the types of clients you have, the people you serve, sometimes it becomes sort of a gated thing for us mortals to not be able to get it until we reach a certain level where, oh, okay, so now I can spend this amount of money. So I'm really happy to hear that.
Absolutely. And might I add something here? Well, with the amount of companies that I've consulted with across the globe, there are some leaders who have a vision for their people and their teams and their organization. And so they bring us in because they have that vision. And yet there are many others who also don't have that vision. And so sometimes we've been trading in firms, and then because either for change of leadership, you find that people with a little narrow vision step in and then they say, well, this is what our people don't need. But everyone in reality needs to communicate and present himself or herself in the highest or to the highest level possible. So, in fact, shortchanging your people or taking it away from them is a very sad thing. But I always say each to their own. We don't judge. Who are we to judge?
That's right. That's right. Talked about the certification, which is another thing. You have the C3 certified corporate consultant, and you have a few other programs. What does this mean, and why would someone in the business world consider something like this?
Armando, like I said earlier, everyone needs to communicate and present well. But if you have a stamp of approval from a globally accredited organization and body, it always is a door opener. For example, a lot of people have asked me, how was your experience at Harvard? I said, lovely. They asked me very honestly then, what new did you learn at Harvard? And I had already had years of experience before I enrolled at Harvard Business School. Uh, to be honest, I already knew what I was taught in those 2 years at Harvard Business School. It's because I was doing that on a daily basis for years before that. But what did I gain was a certificate, which became a door opener. So today, when you sit across a room and you say, well, someone's Harvard educated, or an Ivy League educated professional, or Oxford educated, so people almost sit back and listen. Now, I'm not saying, oh, I can guarantee complete sense because we've seen otherwise as well.
Yes.
But fairly, I would say a good percentage, you know, there'd be sense coming out from there. Studied research knowledge is well shared, and that's critical. Uh, but more specifically, you'd find that people come out with a C3 certification, a certified corporate consultant. Now, what does that entail or enable them to do in the real business world? A lot of entrepreneurs who have all the possible technical knowledge. They have a great product and service line, but now that they want to share it with the larger world, they don't have that platform exposure.
Mm.
That's where we come in. They go through the management you program with us. We upskill them. We bring them to a certain level where they can sell their ideas to the larger world now and get or build a new employee or customer base. So that's where we come in. And then we give them the C3, the Certified Corporate Consultant, which comes from the highest training body in America, the American Society of Training and Development, the ASTD. Now it's known as the ATD, the Association of Talent Development. Now, if you have an ASTD or an ATD certification, which is from the highest training body in America, with the best C3 Certified Corporate Consultant training, with the world's leader in communication and presentation, I think doors open for you.
That makes perfect sense. So once you want to do it professionally, maybe you want to offer the service, or maybe even you want to get a leadership position at a top tier organization, the certificate really will help open, or I mean, it does, as every certificate from a third party body can give you. Which is great. But, and by the way, for those who don't know, I'm not completely sure of the stat, but I understand that is you're one of the only bodies that actually provides this.
Yes, correct. We're the only learning organization in the world to give you the C3, the Certified Corporate Consultant. There is no other trading company in the world who can give you the C3, and the C3 is the highest level of soft skill certification. We took years. Well, as a board, we have over 100 years of experience. You see, we have a Fossil and Ted Hollingworth on board, and he's trained roughly around 6 US presidents. I've worked with President Obama as well.
That is fantastic. So I don't want to take off too much of your time because you've already shared so much with us. But I do want to ask one more thing, which is if you had something you would recommend to people, anyone who's listening, what would be your top most recommendation to someone who is considering a leadership role?
You know, as a leader, remember your only job as a leader is to create new leaders. And so you need to ask yourself, how are you creating that new leadership pipeline? And in order to practically create a great leadership pipeline, you need to coach, you need to mentor, you need to at times counsel, at times you need to facilitate. Now, all these are different skill sets and different disciplines. Many leaders I've worked with don't even know that there is a difference between coaching, counseling, consulting, training, and mentoring. And so they mean well, but they make an absolute mess of the entire game plan. So remember, as a future leader, the only job is to coach your people to become the next in line to lead. We need great leaders, not followers. There are many followers, any which ways.
Thank you so much, Leandro. That was fantastic advice. Where can people find you or the Miller Weinman Group if they're interested in following up?
We can leave our website with them. We can also leave at the end of the show my personal email ID so they can get in touch with me directly. We're based out of Boston, but we all live out of a suitcase. I spend a week in India, and then I'm in Asia, in Europe, as well as in Africa. I was in South America right through September and October. So I pretty much live out of a suitcase and travel a bit crazy.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for opening yourself up to questions, to give us this possibility of learning from you. I will put that information in the show notes for everyone who's listening. And it's been an honor having you on the show today, Leandro.
Armando, thank you very much. And from all of us at the Millibyman family, once again, all the very best and thank you very much. Invest in yourself today.
Thank you.